You're listening to the Trailblazers Podcast, episode 60 with Minda Hearts.
You're listening to the Trailblazers Podcast, where we will explore the stories of successful Black professionals. Join us as we highlight the knowledge, resources, and tools of these accomplished trailblazers to help provide the know-how, confidence, and motivation you need to blaze your trail. And now, here's your host, Stephen Hart.
Today's episode of the Trailblazers Podcast is sponsored by the Campaign for Black Male Achievement, a national membership network that reminds us that there's no cavalry coming to save the day in our communities. We are the iconic leaders we've been waiting for, the curators of the change we're seeking to see. To learn more about groundbreaking work of the Campaign for Black Male Achievement, visit tbpod.com/Black Male Achievement. Hello and welcome to the Trailblazers Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Hart. We're into the second week of Women's History Month at the time this episode goes live. And to show love, Trailblazers.fm will explore and highlight amazing Black women all month long. And so on today's episode, we're so very pleased. We're talking with a woman by the name of Minda Hearts. Minda is the founder of the Memo, which is a career development company created to help women of color prepare for a seat at the table and be ready to crush it when she does. So in 2016, Minda was nominated as a change maker at the White House State of Women Summit. And in today's conversation, we talk about who the memo is for, how Minda is helping women of color to win in the workplace, and we talk about so much more. It's a terrific episode for all our trailblazer women looking to push through that ceiling at work. Guys, as always, I'm going to encourage you to share, tweet, email, open your cell phone right now, WhatsApp this episode to a friend, a family member, or a colleague who you think needs to hear this episode most. Hit us up. We're at TBPod. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And guys, go ahead, grab your notepad right now or open an Evernote and get set to hear today's conversation with our trailblazer, Minda Hearts. Minda, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for being our featured guest.
Hi, Stephen. It's a pleasure. And I know people are like, wait, Hart, we're not related, but that we know of. Okay.
My daughter, before every interview, for those listening, I do interviews at night. And so I'm oftentimes putting my daughter down. I have a 6-year-old. And she always asks me, who's going to be on the podcast today? And I say, I'm talking to Minda Hearts. And she's like, that's close to our name.
Yes. So maybe somewhere along the line, we might be related cousins or something. Yeah. Your line dropped the hearts. You dropped the S, and so mine kept moving. So.
There you go.
Yeah. It's great to be here.
Thank you. So, we're celebrating Women's History Month when this interview goes live. And I'd love to start things off by asking you to share some names of women who've inspired you.
Oh, yes. Well, it's just awesome coming off of Black History Month and then moving right into women's history. So it's like 2-for-1 deal. So I really enjoy that. For me, my mom obviously is a trailblazer and just a dynamic woman. And so everything starts with her because she gave me life. But also women that I look up to, get inspiration from are Ava DuVernay.
Mm-hmm.
She started her career later in life. So it's never, age is nothing but a number. And so she constantly is reminding me of that as I think about, as I age, that things still happen even when you least expect it. And another woman that I really admire is Tracy Ellis Ross, another one that just continuously breaking glass ceilings. And I think that's really awesome. And then I have a lot of good girlfriends that, ones that maybe you wouldn't read their names or Google them. You might not know them, but they're just really strong women, dedicated and focused with a lot of faith. And so shout outs to all the women just making moves and working really hard because we continue to inspire one another. That's how greatness happens.
Yes. So doing my research about Minda, I happen to know you're a girl who who learned quite a bit from your grandma.
Yes. and obviously my grandmother, she's definitely a trailblazer. So I'm thankful to still have her in my life as well.
Minda, what's been one of the lessons you learned from her that definitely you'll continue to pass along, what she's taught throughout your life?
So sometimes as women, sometimes we're viewed as caretakers. And so one of the things that she constantly told me growing up was that you come from a long line of caretakers, but don't care too much for someone else that you forget to care for yourself. And I was like, oh my gosh, you don't realize that advice till you later in life. And then she used to tell me when I was younger, when you're in school, you think, oh, I'm so popular. I just want to be with the popular kids. And she said, when you get older, popularity won't matter much. You'll be able to count all your good friends on probably one hand.
Right.
And and you do value those solid friendships. So grandma has so many jewels.
Yes. A lot of wisdom right there in that one.
Yes.
Let me ask you, what keeps you grounded today?
I would say my faith in God. I grew up as a PK's kid. And so, faith was definitely the thing that kept all of us going. And even still, as an entrepreneur, you have those days where you want to bang your head against the wall. Mm-hmm. There's days you want to, scream loud because of the wins or because of the losses. And I think faith is the only thing that keeps you pushing, knowing that you have a higher calling and knowing that the seeds that you're sowing have to produce, because that's what the word says. You sow your seeds and you will produce. So that's fundamentally how I live my life. So I keep sowing the seeds, knowing that my harvest will come.
Yes, so true. So let's talk a little bit about the memo. Maybe tell us a little bit about it and what you do in your day to day right now.
Yes, absolutely. Well, the Memo, as you mentioned, is a career development platform for women of color. And I started the Memo because working in corporate America, sometimes you get very lonely being the only woman and sometimes the only woman of color. And I thought, how could I give back to women of color to help us prepare for our seat at the table? Because many of us belong there. And sometimes we don't have the resources or the network to be able to get there. And so I thought I want to be able to help women of color at every stage of their career, whether that's salary negotiation, career transitioning to etiquette. Like when you sit down at the table, I want you to be ready and confident because you feel like you're equipped. And so the platform allows for on and offline career boot camps and a community of and access, because access is so important. And so the Memo is there as just another tool for your personal toolkit.
Right. You talk about the focus on women of color, but let's talk about the differences between a career development company like the Memo and any other, right? What are some of the unique strategies that you might use to engage a woman of color to be able to prepare them to win in the workplace that maybe another career development agency just misses that mark?
Right. That's a great question. Well, for starters, it's so being a woman of color, creating a platform for women of color, and a lot of the other platforms are not created by women of color for women of color. It's maybe someone that doesn't look like you telling you what you need to do to get to the C-suite. And so I think it's so, isn't that something? And, not for nothing, for many years in my career, those were the platforms I went to because they had really great advice, really great content, great events, but you still feel a void because you're like, okay, well, this is great, but you don't look like me and our challenges are a little bit different. So I can take certain things out of here. But realistically, for example, one time I went to an event, a fundraiser, and I went to the fundraiser. I was the only person of color there that wasn't serving. But when I showed up to the event, the doorman thought I was the server. And he sent me around back to the service entry way.
No.
And but I didn't realize that's what he was doing till I got back there. I was like, oh, my God. But these are the types of things that happen in our career that sometimes a white founder would not be able to speak to. They can empathize. But when these certain things happen, these biases take place, it's great for women to be able to talk about that in a setting where you can say, oh, yeah, me too. And not in a victimized type of way, but how we know what those biases feel like, so we can talk about those things candidly.
Yep.
And so just having a voice having a space that you feel safe to be able to talk about the hard stuff, but also talk about the great stuff. And so I think that's one of our unique properties to the memo, just having that space for women of color, and to having the network, because some of our counterparts that are not of color, they have these really great networks. And so leveraging our network is so important. So bringing women together where we can just continue to help each other and create more seats for each other is so important.
Really appreciate you sharing that. And there's some good nuggets in what you just said. And I'll come back to that in a second. But I wanted to switch gears. And first off, how long has the memo been in business?
So the memo has been in business 2 years.
Nice, nice. Congrats.
Thank you very much. So
in that time, you've as you shared a couple minutes ago, you've certainly had your share of unexpected roadblocks, right? And oftentimes for an entrepreneur, they come at the most unexpected times, right?
Yes.
What have been some of the failures that almost made you second guess your purpose and direction with the platform?
That, it's funny. When I first started the platform, I thought, okay, well, I think, so one of the big things is when the salary conversation arises, Stephen, they say, women make 77 cents on the dollar. Well, that's not true for all women. Women of color start anywhere from 54 to 64 cents. So Caucasian women make 77 cents on the dollar. And so we're left out of the conversation, period. So when you say hidden figures, we're just thrown in this like big ambiguous space of women. And so I thought, that's unfortunate. And I want to be able to talk about that voice, right? So when I started going to investors and talking to them about the memo, they just didn't get it. They're like, well, there's all these other career development platforms out there. Why can't you guys just use that? And so after hearing that, them not understanding what having no seats at the table looked like, I decided that, okay, I'm going to fund this myself. I'm going to make it work. I'm going to bootstrap. And so for a long time, I was hearing this, no, it's not going to work. You don't need it. Just plug into what's already there. And so you do start to second guess yourself. Like, am I going to be able to break in? But I knew from how I felt in others that I've met throughout the years that we do need a space, and one that's just as prominent as any other space out there. And so I knew I was onto something, and that's where that faith had to kick in. My mother used to always say, don't worry about what anybody else thinks as long as you know. And so I kept having to remind myself as long as I know and keep it moving. But when you hear people, investors, right, that can make or break a situation, when you think about it sometimes, and I just had to move past it. I mean, that's hard. Hearing no, why do we need that? And even some of the career development platforms that I went to just for advice, they were saying, well, why is this necessary? Mm-hmm. So so again, it reminded me, okay, I have to keep moving. But I think funding and access to capital is always when it comes to being a founder of color.
Right. It's always tough being able to get through those failures and come out the other side and process those lessons, right? But it helps to mold you as you go on and you grow that tough shell. I'm curious to know, who is the memo for? I know it's for women of color, but are there specific age ranges that you're focused on reaching?
So when I started the memo along with my co-founder, Lauren, I thought, okay, well, I think women of color need these boot camps, but I don't know for sure. So we prototyped for a whole year in different cities doing pop-up career boot camps. And what we found that 90% of the women coming to the career boot camps were African-American women. And then from there it was Asian and Latina, And so from there, we just started to make our voice more intentional so that there was a space for women of color. But it's interesting. We have women from entry level in their career all the way to mid-career women. So that could be your early 20s up to your 50s because, the workspace is changing. And, what worked for you maybe 40 years ago, you have to relearn some of the ways to network and new resume techniques and things of the sort. So we see women from all age ranges. And I think it's really important because at a boot camp, you might have a 25-year-old and you might have a 45-year-old. And that in and of itself is awesome because now we're engaging intersectionality and the generation gap. So we're bringing both parties together so that they can learn from one another.
So let's talk about the importance of your community and women who you work with, maybe seeing someone that looks like them actually make it.
Yeah, it's amazing because some of the boot camps lead, and I tell my story how, being a first generation college student and moving up the corporate ladder. And so I was so surprised by how many of the women that attend were just inspired by my story and where I've traveled to in my career and some of the ups and downs, but to see somebody who's quote unquote made it. And then we bring in other women that are influencers, partners at Goldman Sachs, some of the top law firms in New York. We bring in executives so that they could see what it looks like to be in the C-suite. They get to have intimate conversations with these women because I mentioned before, community and access are so important. So you could follow someone on Twitter and that's great, but what about being in the same room with them, having that access? And so with the community that we're building now, we're even having some companies start to reach out to us and say, we know that you're training a whole lot of women of color. We have a couple of positions available and we'd love for you to tell your community. And that's important, just the same, having those opportunities. So is key.
So how do you actually manage this? Do you have like a digital community that kind of helps each other out, like a Facebook group set up?
Yeah, so we do have a private Facebook group, and then we also have this membership platform. So
got it.
Women can connect that way.
So you were touching on this just a minute ago. You're helping them to kind of get that exposure, right? How does that impact their confidence and their beliefs?
So that's I think that's another thing that comes out of it is the confidence level. I recently had one of our members, I call her family now because, she's been coming to our boot camps for a while now. And when she first came, she was very shy, very timid. And now I see her and she goes to networking events. She's working the room, and it was so wonderful the last time that I saw her at one of our events, and she came up and she said, I'm just so thankful that I had the memo. It was there for me when I needed it most. And the main thing, it helped me with my confidence. And I think when you are with other women that look like you, that are striving for the same thing, you can't help but feel inspired.
Mm-hmm. Yes. How can we, both men and women, and I know your focus is on the women, but, how can we begin to invest in ourselves?
Investment in yourself is really great. I like to say that we are the architects of our life. So no matter what it is, we get to build it. We have the control, we have the blueprint, and we can do that. And at the Memo, we do focus on women, but we do corporate workshops, unisex workshops. And I always tell men and women that it's important to invest in yourself, even if it takes you paying a little more for that. So maybe your company may or may not have a professional development fund for you to tap into leadership resources or professional development resources, but find those opportunities like career boot camps or meetup groups so that you can invest in yourself. If you see that you have an area that you need help on, so say public speaking, you want to be the next Tony Robbins, right? Well, it's probably but you're a little shy. So it's going to take an investment in yourself to take some of those courses, to join Toastmasters or things like that, to be able to invest in yourself because you are your greatest asset.
Yes. So true. I like to tell people everything I've ever done in life, I have taught myself how to do. It wasn't anything I learned in college, and even this podcast is a testimony for that, right?
Right.
and like you just said, I actually, one of my biggest hangups is I say like 500 times in an interview and it drives me crazy, but I keep pushing through it. And, I've developed over time. I've done the Toastmasters for about a year and actually want to get back into it right now. But it's so important that we take that time to really focus on building and developing in whatever way we would like to, that would kind of help us move towards our purpose and something that we might have a passion in once we get that confidence.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd love to have you maybe, sprinkle some of that black girl magic right now and maybe maybe provide us some career development tips that we can begin to take action on right now.
Absolutely. Well, so I'm sprinkling like a salt shaker over
That's
here.
That's right.
There's a quote that I really like by Audre Lorde. She said, "I am deliberate and afraid of nothing." And I think if we think about our career or our passions that way, our passion leads to our purpose. So finding a way, as you said, to invest in yourself, even if it's just an hour a day, doing that, whatever that is to you, physically, mentally, spiritually, it's important that we feed our souls and our mind and our spirit. And so be deliberate and have no fear. And I know that sounds very cliche, but I think we have to, because we are the curators of our own career, we have to take it by the reins and leverage our networks. So this is important. Leveraging your networks. Malcolm Gladwell has a book called The Tipping Point, and he talks about mavens and salesmen and connectors. Find out who in your network fall within those three categories and figure out what your ask is of them that would help you move your goal forward. That might be a new job. That might be starting a podcast. That, it may be learning how to save more. But I definitely encourage everybody to read that book. And having a network is so important because, as a student once told me at a career development workshop, your network is your net worth, she said. And that's important. And so I would say leverage your network. And then also, I would say always be ready. I tell people at the boot camp, never give anybody a reason to tell you no because you weren't ready. As you mentioned, if someone says, "Hey, Stephen, I want you to speak on this panel next week for Forbes." Well, if you're nervous and scared and you know that that's something that is hard for you to do, but you say, "Wow, I have this awesome opportunity and I'm going to have to say no maybe because I'm not ready." So always stay ready. That means resume ready, have it updated because you never know when someone's going to say, "Hey, I got this opportunity, shoot me over your resume." And if you have this dated like 1999 resume with how many words per minute you used to type, that's not going to help you, That's not the way. So leverage your network, stay ready, and those two things will go a long way.
Two very, very important points right there. And to add to that resume piece, as a branding and marketing person and also a podcaster today, I can't stress how important it is to have your resume isn't just an 8.5 by 11 anymore. You have a digital presence that someone will look you up, someone will Google you, someone will go to your LinkedIn, and look to see what else they can find out about you. And all too often, Minda, I think that people lose sight of that, right? They think, I don't need to utilize LinkedIn. 80-90% of recruiters are going there immediately if they have an interest in you. So you kind of have to think ahead and be prepared for that, as you were saying just a minute ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't remember the last time somebody asked me to send me for me to send their resume to me, but they're always asking me, send me your LinkedIn or send me your online calling card. So as you said, it's really important to keep that up. And if you have a passion or an area that you're interested in getting involved in, make a quick website, your name, your picture, a bio, just have something that people can go to and, give yourself 30, 60, 90-day goals of accountability. You may not, I think that's important too. Sometimes we have to be our own accountability partners.
Absolutely. So, we're still in the early parts of this year, and I'm curious to know, what's one of your biggest challenges that you're working hard to conquer, for the memo?
Yeah, well, as you know, entrepreneurship, there's always a few things you can choose from. But I think the challenge right now is just getting the word out there more. I mean, we have a nice platform of subscribers, but and it's been really built by word of mouth, which has been great. But I think the main thing is expanding our reach. Right. And so the challenge is around that to scale. So for us, it's just that extra press or opportunities like, being on podcasts like yours is always good, just to let women know that there's a place for them. And if you're feeling alone or you need some extra tweaks or enhancements, or you just want a network that looks like you that you could tap into, knowing that that's available to you. Because once people find out about us, they always come back to the next boot camp and the next event. And it's just knowing that the space exists. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs always, that's one challenge that you bump your head up against the wall on often.
So you say you traveled to different cities. What are some of the cities that you're going to be in this year?
Yeah, so we do boot camps. As I mentioned, we do them on and offline, but we do them in New York, California, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, North Carolina, Atlanta, and coming to a city near you if you're listening and you need and you want the memo to come to you. And we also do career readiness boot camps at HBCUs for women in their last 2 years of college, because it's important for them to have a network that they can tap into when they graduate, but also taking that practice versus theory so that when they do get in the workforce, they really know what to expect.
Right. That's great. I'm sure you're going to tell us at the end where we can learn more about that. But, before we wrap up here, I saw that you volunteer with Women's Shelter and with the New York Junior League. And I wanted to ask you, why it's so important to you to volunteer and give back.
Yeah, giving back is so, so important. I feel like that's my way of sowing seeds in different people and communities' lives. I started volunteering, oh my gosh, when I was a teenager. My first volunteer experience was, I don't even know if they have these anymore, so maybe I'm dating myself, but a candy striper at the hospital. And so it's always been important for me to give back. And I get so much joy. Two very important things that I do here in New York is work with women who are formerly incarcerated. And so helping them prepare for mock interviews and update their resumes. And, one woman once said to me, she was in the healthcare field before she was incarcerated. And she said, I just don't feel like I can do this. And I said, you know what? Tell me one of your wins before you went into prison. What was a win that you were proud of in your career? And she said, well, I was the employee of the year 5 times. I said, girl, when they tell you, tell me more about yourself, you better tell them about that because that's important. I said, I've never been employee of the year, so just reminding people and inspiring them is important, and reminding us that we all have something good inside, and how do we frame that and how do we tell that story? So I'm getting back from them just as much as they get back from me. And so that's important. That's
the biggest thing for me about volunteering, right? You initiate the action to pour into someone else, but you end up getting so much. You feel like you got so much more than you were able to give in the end of it. As an entrepreneur, some might say, well, when do you find time, right? But you, and but you make that time, and it creates such a great balance, right? From all the other noise that you have happening.
You hit it on the head. The noise. I mean, so yes, you're burning the midnight oil, but I try to always keep that space open because that's my downtime. That's my time where they're the star and I get to see them shine. And so that's important for me.
Yes. Minda, I'd love to have you give us some resource gems before you go. What's a book that you've read that you couldn't put down and, you found it tremendously useful?
A book that I really, really enjoy is Tools of Titans by Tim Ferriss.
You're the second person inside of a week that has mentioned this book.
Yes, that is like a Bible for business. It's such a handy thing, from entrepreneurship to work-life balance to relationships. Everything is in this book. It's very thick, but it's worth it. And you have so many great businessmen and women and athletes talking about how they train, and just it's so insightful. And I think especially for an entrepreneur or anyone with passion to excel in a certain area, it's very helpful. So I would say that book, and also being organized. I think there's so much going on in the world now, Stephen, that it's easy to just not be as organized as we'd like to be. And so utilizing those tools, organizational tools, to help us stay on track and keep us accountable. So like Trello or Evernote, you can download those on your iPhone, and those are really helpful, and they keep me in check from day to day. And
girl, so those Trailblazers podcast, tired of hearing about Evernote.
That's the go-to.
That's my
it's helpful. I mean, you got to go with what works. And I think, and hey, I'm still kind of an old school girl, so I use a lot of sticky notes and paper.
Yeah.
So you have to find what works for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So last question. I'd love to have you share one thing our aspiring trailblazers should maybe look to put into action this week to help them blaze their trail.
Yeah, that's a great, what I would start with is enhancing your elevator pitch or creating a pitch, because that is really important, because that is your introduction to, that's where people get to see you and get to know you, and you got to give them something that makes them want to find out more about you. So if you don't have an elevator pitch, that's a one minute pitch about who you are, where you're going, where you're from. And I don't know if, for me, it's just important that you have that. So if you're at a networking event, you're in an elevator, it's that quick and dirty about yourself that would make someone want to know more about you. So I think this week, make sure that you get your elevator pitch. You can Google elevator pitch. There's so many different resources out there, videos to read, but you should have one. If you don't have one, get one. And kind of a funny thing is, for those who just want kind of a laugh, if you've heard of Jay-Z, the rapper, he has a song called Public Service Announcement. And in like 60 seconds, he tells you where he's from, where he's been, who he's dating. And those are kind of things in a fun way. That's like an elevator pitch, but you want it to be catchy. You want it to be inspirational. You just want people to have a sample, but they want more. So get yourself an elevator pitch or enhance it. Keep perfecting it.
That's what I was just going to say, and to that point, I am one in Evernote. Whenever I'm working on a new brand or I'm working on a pitch, I usually start with just brainstorming everything I can, like doing a brain dump in an Evernote. And over time, and I'm somebody that will take time to finesse and kind of work through it. But I do a brain dump at first and eventually just start, over time, I just take away and just keep looking to use less words to get that same message out, and just basically take it all the way down till I have a sentence or two that, and a paragraph, and depending on the level at which I want to deliver that, right? But
yeah,
it really helps you to look at the big picture and then kind of drill down to the meat in the pie.
Exactly, just like you said. So there's a 1 minute pitch you should have, maybe that you would do in a quick elevator. There's a 5 minute that you might do at a dinner party or cocktail party, and then a 15-minute pitch would be maybe a short talk, interview, or
yes,
pitching your idea. So having those three and refining them the way that you said is perfect. And another thing, Stephen, I would encourage people to do is on their cell phones, put the video on them, and practice your pitch.
Yes.
So that's the way you pitch. So I would say just get your cell phone and just do a raw and dirty one of just what's in your mind. And then second time around, write it out like you did in Evernote, and then record yourself doing it that way and see which one works better, and keep refining that. And when you see yourself doing it, it's very sobering. Makes you want to enhance and perfect it.
I tell you, I've been trying to get myself accustomed to doing more video, and it's been the challenge of my year. But I've spent $30 buying a tripod, a full height tripod, and a $5 adapter for my iPhone, and put my iPhone on a tripod and get away from it and actually practice talking on video on my phone. It's not something for Facebook Live or Insta Stories, right? But I've been practicing, and getting comfortable with video, right? And I encourage people to do that, because we're in that age, right? You have to get comfortable talking in front of a crowd, and eventually the likelihood is you're going to have to at some point be comfortable talking on video, depending on your profession, right? But
absolutely, yes.
Minda, I had so much fun talking with you. Thank you so much for being our guest on the podcast. Before we wrap up, I would love to invite you to tell us how we can stay connected to you and learn a little bit more about the memo.
Yes, please. Thank you so much, Stephen. I thank you for the work that you're doing with this podcast series. It's so important. And to find us, it's myweeklymemo.com. And you can find us on Twitter and Facebook on the same handle. And you can find me on Twitter at Minda Hearts. So thank you.
And she'll tweet back.
I do tweet back. That's what it's there for. So, let's engage.
Absolutely. Minda, thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephen. Have a great night.
Well, that's it for today. Thanks again for listening to this episode of the Trailblazers podcast. I'll be posting links to all of today's book recommendations and links mentioned on our show notes page at tbpod.com. If today was your first time listening to the Trailblazers podcast, I just want to extend a warm Trailblazers welcome to you. We're so happy to have you here, and we encourage you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button in your favorite podcast app. Go ahead and browse through some of our past episodes to keep the knowledge flowing. If you're a fan of the podcast and today's content, and you're maybe already subscribed to the podcast, please continue to share and invite your friends, your family, or colleagues to listen to an episode that you think might impact them most. We believe that someone listening to these inspiring stories will be moved to make significant changes that will have generational impact for many others, both now and well into the future. Don't miss next week's episode. New episodes are released each and every Monday by about 5 a.m. Eastern. Trailblazers, jump off this podcast today. Go find a way to rise above, go way beyond, and keep blazing your trail. Cheers.